You're seeing a number of Christian Americans not just resisting Trump's foreign policy, but also divided over his actions on immigration. And with that, there's a question of whether a church is an appropriate or legal venue for protesting. Right in that, because on Sunday, you had roughly 24 protesters interrupting a church service in St. Paul.
Renee good! Renee good! Renee good!
And you had them going to this church because they had found out that one of the pastors is also the acting director of the city's ICE field office for enforcement and removal operations. Or with them actually being named in a lawsuit accusing ICE and its employees of having, quote, acted to suppress this dissent by abducting United States citizens and holding them incommunicado for hours like the mass secret police of pre-World War II Germany or Pinochet's Chile. And then with that saying they have pepper sprayed, violently subdued, and aimed assault rifles at protesters and observers, and even followed observers home to scare them in a tactic lifted straight from the mafia. Now, with all that, it's not clear whether this pastor was present during the protest on Sunday, but you did have journalist Don Lemon there covering the event and speaking to people on both sides, which actually included the pastor who was apparently leading the service at the time, and he said,
I mean, this is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship.
You've also now had Trump claiming that these protesters were professionals who have been highly trained to scream, rant, and rave like lunatics in a certain manner, just like they are doing, and adding they are troublemakers who should be thrown in jail or thrown out of the country. And then actually, perhaps most notably, you had AG Pam Bondi claiming that, quote, attacks against law enforcement and the intimidation of Christians are being met with the full force of federal law. And you had Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, confirming that her division is investigating and accusing protesters of desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers. Right, and then with all this, what you're seeing is that she and other officials are pointing to a 1994 law known as the FACE Act, or the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances and Places of Religious Worship, which was actually passed largely in response to a sharp rise in violence and other tactics meant to intimidate abortion providers and patients and physically block access, making it a federal crime to use force, threat of force, or physical obstruction to interfere with someone obtaining or providing reproductive health care. But the law also applied to places of worship, and so now it could possibly be relevant to this case. Though I'll say a big thing is that the law clearly says it should not be construed to prohibit any expressive conduct, including peaceful picketing or other peaceful demonstration protected from legal prohibition by the First Amendment to the Constitution. And so that's why you're seeing people like a professor of constitutional law at Georgetown University explaining, if they are merely expressing their views without obstructing access to the church, the First Amendment would protect them just as it protects those who protest outside abortion clinics without obstructing access or intimidating patients. But if they engaged in physical obstruction, the First Amendment does not protect that. But here, with that, what I'll add is that if the FACE Act does not work, Dillon also mentioned the possibility of invoking the Enforcement Act of 1871. And that is actually known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, and it was meant to protect Black Americans from white supremacist violence, although again, it is far from clear whether that legal argument's actually going to hold up in court. Though if you only based it off of the way that Dillon has presented it, it's an open and shut case, even while her investigation is supposedly ongoing. She even suggested that Don Lemon might be prosecuted as well, despite being there to cover the event as a journalist, saying in an interview with far-right influencer Benny Johnson,
Don Lemon himself has come out and said he knew exactly what was going to happen inside that facility. He went into the facility and then he began, quote unquote, committing journalism. And as if that's sort of a shield from being an embedded part of a criminal conspiracy. It isn't. Come next Sunday, nobody should think in the United States that they're going to be able to get away with this. Everyone in the protest community needs to know that the fullest force of the federal government is going to come down and prevent this from happening and put people away for a long, long time.
But very notably, with all that, you had Lemon claiming clearly several times in his live stream that he didn't see himself as a participant.
We're not part of the activists, but we're here just reporting on them. But anyways, I'm not going to get in the middle of it because I'm not here as an activist. I'm here as a journalist. I'm just going to be as respectful as possible. I'm not here to intimidate anybody. I'm just here to chronicle and to get some answers and let people know.
And now you've got Lemon saying in an email to NBC News that it's notable that I've been cast as the face of a protest I was covering as a journalist, especially since I wasn't the only reporter there, and adding, the framing is telling, but what's even more telling is the barrage of violent threats along with homophobic and racist slurs directed at me online by MAGA supporters and amplified by parts of the right-wing press. And actually, among those responses, you had rapper Nicki Minaj. You had her launching a homophobic attack against him, saying, I want that thug in jail, lock him up. Though to with that, you had Lemon clapping back, saying she should get a life, stop being a pick-me, and then saying you have one family member who is a sex offender, the other family member is reportedly a pedophile. You have the nerve to talk about me? Because if you didn't know, Minaj's husband is actually a registered sex offender, and her brother, he actually got sentenced back in 2020 for raping an 11-year-old girl. But with this whole situation, well, you've had the Trump administration framing this protest as an attack on Christians. At least some of the protesters, they identified themselves as Christians themselves, right? And that includes one of the organizers, a civil rights lawyer, who also says that she's an ordained reverend, right? And so with that, she claimed that she wanted to make members of the church aware that one of their pastors was involved in Trump's immigration crackdown, saying to have someone in the role of a pastor also being in that role as an overseer is unconscionable. And then adding that Jesus called out religious leaders for their hypocrisy and argued that that's part of our duty as Christians. And really, the example is showing why a Christian may have a problem with ICE. They just keep piling up, especially in Minnesota, where with one of the latest incidents sparking outrage allegedly involving federal agents forcing open a door and detaining a U.S. citizen at his home at gunpoint without a warrant, with them then leading him out onto the streets in his underwear in sub-freezing conditions before then loading him into a car, driving him away, and then making him get out again so they could take a picture. And then when the agents eventually realized that he was a U.S. citizen with no criminal record, they drove him back home, allegedly leaving without apologizing for detaining him or breaking his door. Though with this, you had DHS defending itself by describing what happened as a targeted operation seeking two convicted sex offenders that the agency claimed lived with a man, which is also a claim that the family has disputed. While we wait to see what happens here, if more information comes out, while this man did make it home, many others haven't, right? And while a lot of what we're talking about, it's what we're seeing as agents are being recorded out in the open, but there are also grave concerns about what's happening behind closed doors, especially because more people are dying in ICE custody than almost ever before. Just recently, ICE revealed that an immigrant from Nicaragua was found dead at a Texas immigration detention facility last week, with the agency claiming that he appears to have killed himself. And notably, this is the same facility where ICE said someone else died on January 3rd after attempting to take his own life, a man by the name of Geraldo Lunas Campos. But you see, one of the big problems there is that there was another detainee who claims that he saw at least 5 guards struggling with Lunas Campos, who was complaining that he didn't have his medication and who was then choked to death while repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe," in Spanish. Right? And with that, you've had an employee of the county's medical examiner's office backing that up by telling Lunas Campos's daughter that the preliminary cause of death has been listed as asphyxiation due to neck and chest compression. And so that office is likely to classify the incident as a homicide pending the results of a toxicology report. And all of this is ICE's initial statement gave no cause of death, claiming that Lunas Campos became disruptive while in line for his medication and was then placed in segregation where staff observed him in distress. Or with a DHS spokesperson later claiming that he violently resisted the staff and continued to attempt to take his life, and that during the ensuing struggle, he stopped breathing and lost consciousness. But then also, curiously, the administration has reportedly made moves to try and quickly deport 2 detainees who gave differing accounts of what happened to the Washington Post. And while you had their spokesperson declining to say whether the effort had anything to do with what happened, legal experts say that, deporting them, it would make it difficult for investigators to obtain and verify their accounts. And then also with this, it appeared that ICE was maybe going for kind of an angle of, well, it wasn't one of the good ones. Or with ICE emphasizing that Lunas Campos was convicted of several crimes, including aggravated assault with a weapon and first-degree sexual abuse involving a child. Well, that then brings us to another part of the whole situation of who they're putting in detention centers and who they're getting rid of. Because while in the past you had Trump repeatedly saying we have to go after the violent criminals, available data actually suggests that most immigrants in ICE detention, they have no criminal record. All the while they then may face the substandard conditions and physical and sexual abuse that has been reported at facilities all across the country, but also, especially in this one in Texas. Hell, even ICE's own inspectors have cited dozens of violations. Right? And with that, deaths nationwide have occurred with shocking frequency. At least 30 detainees died in 2025, the highest annual total in more than 20 years, back to the first full year of ICE's existence. And now this year, on top of the 2 who have died at this place in Texas, there have been at least 3 other deaths, putting the country on track to absolutely shatter the record.